Hello, welcome back to Behind the Faders, the channel where we talk about all aspects of live sound mixing and live sound in general. And if you enjoy that kind of content, please subscribe to the channel. It helps me so much and it doesn't cost you anything. And more than 90% of the people watching my content haven't subscribed. Today I want to talk about the differences between a subgroup and a DCA, because it's really important to understand that. At first glance, they do pretty much the same thing. They control multiple channels all at once, but they do it in a very different way. If you use a subgroup, you route your input channel into the subgroup, and then you route the subgroup into your mix bus. That means the signal runs through it, so you can apply processing to it. For example, very common, you put all your background vocals onto a subgroup and compress them there, so kind of glue them together on the subgroup, and from there it goes into the mix bus. Or when I mix orchestras, I don't want to EQ like 12 violin channels, so I would route them all to a subgroup and EQ them all together there. But it also means if you have channels that you want to pan out a little bit on a subgroup, you now need a stereo subgroup, and I think most of the time people use stereo subgroups anyway. So a DCA, or I'd like to expand this in the analog world because I think it's a little bit easier to wrap your head around it. In the analog world, a DCA is a VCA, and that's a voltage controlled amplifier. So then of course a DCA is a digitally controlled amplifier. And all that this VCA does is it controls the level of the channels assigned to it with a voltage. That's all it does, meaning no signal goes through a VCA or a DCA. Let's go back to DCAs now. DCA has no audio function whatsoever. Picture a DCA like an additional set of fingers, really. So you have 6 channels assigned to a DCA, and if you now change the level, it's like 6 fingers controlling these faders, which means you can't apply any processing to a DCA. And there's no such thing as a stereo DCA, because a DCA doesn't care about signal flow. It only controls faders. So what else is there to consider if you're using subgroups in DCA? Well, first of all, if you're not going to apply processing to a subgroup, there's no reason to use it. Then always use a DCA. But if you do use processing on a subgroup, now there's more to consider. Let's go back to our example with the background vocals glued together by a compressor on a subgroup. If you now put all these input channels onto a DCA, and now you change the levels of this DCA, so of the input channels, you only change the level that the compressor is getting. So you bring the level up and you compress more. You bring the level down, you compress less. You will still hear a level change, but that's defined by the ratio that is set on the compressor. So you should now change the level of your background vocals using the subgroup. Luckily nowadays you can put anything on a DCA, so you just put the subgroup on a DCA rather than the input channels. But most likely you also send these backing vocals to a reverb. And now that you change the level of the background vocals with a subgroup, the reverb doesn't follow, because the send to the reverb is before the subgroup. And since aux sends and subgroups are both buses, you usually can't route one bus into another. Very few desks can do that, but most of the time it doesn't work. So what you have to do is take a DCA, put the subgroup on it, and also the effect return. And now if it changes, you change the level of the background vocals and the reverb follows. Hope this helps. That's it for today. Bye-bye.